The year is 48 CE, and somewhere in Rome, a senator is about to make the worst mistake of his life. He's just returned from the provinces, tired, bored, looking for entertainment in the Subura district, where the oil lamps burn low and questions aren't asked. He picks a room, drops his coins, and waits. The woman who enters wears a dark wig and too much kohl smudged around her eyes, like she is trying to hide something expensive beneath cheap cosmetics. When she turns toward him, their eyes meet, and his blood turns to ice water. He's staring at the Empress of Rome. Not a look-alike, not some clever impersonator, but her, the woman whose face appears on coins, whose children are heirs to the empire, whose husband rules the known world. And she's smiling at him, like she knows exactly what he's thinking, which is probably something along the lines of, "I'm about to die." But here's the truly disturbing part. This isn't her first time here. Not because she needed money, not because she was forced, but because the daughter of Rome's most prestigious families, the wife of Emperor Claudius, the mother of future rulers, apparently found ordinary imperial debauchery too boring. Every client who didn't recognize her became an unwitting accomplice to treason. Every man who did recognize her became someone she owned completely, because what exactly was he going to do? Report the Empress to the Emperor? Congratulations, you've just confessed to sleeping with the Emperor's wife. Enjoy your execution. But let's rewind, because Messalina didn't start as Rome's most notorious sexual predator. She started as what Rome loved most, a symbol. In 38 CE, she was just 15 years old, beautiful in that unsettling way where poets run out of words and start comparing you to goddesses and precious metals. Golden hair, pale skin, features so perfect they looked carved by Praxiteles himself. Her bloodline traced back to Mark Antony, which meant she was basically Roman royalty. And when Emperor Claudius needed a wife to stabilize his shaky new reign, after the absolute circus that was Caligula, Cerule Messalina checked every box. Young, fertile, virtuous, educated in all the proper womanly arts of sitting quietly and looking modest. The Senate approved unanimously. The people cheered in the streets. Finally, Rome would have stability, dignity, a return to the good old days when empresses knew their place. She gave Claudius 2 children in quick succession, a daughter named Octavia and a son named Britannicus, which meant the dynasty was secure and everyone could relax. For the first few years, she played her part flawlessly. She appeared at state functions draped in modest silk, head covered, eyes downcast, every gesture carefully choreographed to embody feminine virtue. In public, she was everything a Roman matron should be: quiet, obedient, focused entirely on her family and the gods. But in private, something else was happening, something that Rome's carefully constructed categories of women couldn't account for. Roman society divided its women into 2 neat boxes, the matrona and the meretrix, the life and the whore, the sacred and the profane. One lived in the atrium raising legitimate children and guarding family honor. These categories were never supposed to touch. The entire social order depended on keeping them separate. Messalina looked at this system and decided to be both simultaneously, and that's when things got interesting in the way that plagues and volcanic eruptions are interesting. The brothel visits were just the beginning, the appetizer before the main course of corruption. Inside the Palatine Palace, Messalina was building something far more elaborate, a system of power and blackmail so sophisticated it would make modern intelligence agencies take notes. Picture the imperial banquets. Rome as elite sprawled on silk couches around low tables laden with roasted dormice, brushed in honey, flamingo tongues, peacock brains, all the delicacies that proved you were civilized and definitely not barbarians. Senators making polite conversation, generals discussing military strategy, everyone performing their roles in the theater of power. Then Messalina would give a signal, and the atmosphere would shift like someone had opened a door to something that should have stayed locked. The respectable guests would leave. New ones would arrive, gladiators still smelling of sand and blood from the arena. Actors from the theater, who were considered barely better than prostitutes in Roman social hierarchy, sometimes foreign captives, occasionally the teenage sons of patrician families summoned under false pretenses. What happened next, the sources describe with a mixture of horror and barely concealed fascination. Forced performances, humiliating contests, senators paired with their political rivals and commanded to entertain the empress in ways that would destroy them if word ever got out. Aristocratic women, married, respectable, terrified, coerced into playing roles that violated every principle of Roman feminine virtue while their husbands watched from across the room, frozen by the understanding that refusal meant ruin. A tribune declined her invitation once, thinking his military rank protected him. 3 days later, he was found floating in the Tiber with his throat cut. A nobleman tried to leave one of her gatherings early, claiming illness. By week's end, his family had lost their ancestral estates to some conveniently discovered legal technicality. The message spread through Rome's elite like a plague. The empress does not accept no. Then came the contest that even 2,000 years later sounds like propaganda, because surely no one would actually do this. According to Pliny the Elder, writing with the clinical precision of a man documenting natural phenomena, Messalina entered into a competition with a famous prostitute named Scylla to see who could service more partners in a single night. Messalina won with 25 partners and was still looking for more when dawn broke. Pliny writes it down like he's recording the eruption of Vesuvius, with horrified fascination and meticulous attention to detail. Is it true? Was it exaggerated? Was it complete fiction designed to destroy her reputation? We'll never know for certain, but the story survived for a reason. It captured something Romans witnessed but couldn't articulate. A woman wielding sexual power, not as submission, but as dominance, as conquest, as a way of collecting leverage, the way other people collected coins. A woman who used sex to dominate men broke their fundamental understanding of how the universe worked, so they turned her into a myth, a monster, a cautionary tale. But myths don't emerge from nothing. They reflect something that happened, something people saw and couldn't forget even when they desperately tried. The palace became a theater of controlled chaos, where humiliation was currency and shame was more valuable than gold. Senators would arrive at dawn to request favors and leave at midnight having performed acts they would never speak of again, not even to their wives, especially not to their wives. Aristocratic families would send their daughters to attend the empress, as was customary and expected, and pray silently to every god they could name that the girls would return unmarried and intact. Most did return eventually. Some didn't. Nobody asked questions, because by this point everyone understood the system Messalina had built. She wasn't just accumulating power to her position as empress. She was collecting it piece by piece, person by person, building a network of complicity so vast and interconnected that moving against her meant destroying yourself. Every participant became a prisoner of their own actions. Every witness became an accomplice bound by shared guilt. She didn't need the Senate's approval or respect. She had something better: their shame, their secrets, their terror that what happened in her chambers might become public knowledge. Loyalty can shift with political winds. Shame lasts forever, buried deep in the soul, where it festers and controls you more effectively than any chain. And through it all, Emperor Claudius worked. He built aqueducts that still function today. He reformed the court system. He expanded the empire into Britain, accomplishing what Julius Caesar couldn't. He was actually a competent administrator, the scholarly emperor everyone had underestimated, proving that just because you stammer and limp doesn't mean you can't run an empire. But he couldn't control his own wife, or maybe, more accurately, he chose not to see what everyone else saw. Did he know? Of course he knew. Rome was gossiping constantly. His own freedmen were begging him to act. But acknowledging the truth meant admitting he'd been cuckolded before the entire empire, that the mother of his heirs had turned his palace into something between a brothel and a blackmail factory. It meant civil war, disgrace, proving every critic right that he was too weak to control his own household. So he did what powerful men have done throughout history when faced with unbearable truth. He looked away, worked harder, buried himself in administrative reforms and military campaigns, and pretended the rot wasn't spreading through his palace like corruption through an infected wound. Then came the autumn of 48 CE, 10 years after their marriage, and Messalina finally found the limit. Claudius was in Ostia, Rome's port city, overseeing the grain supply because emperors who want to avoid riots make sure the city gets fed. Critical work, responsible leadership, everything a good emperor should do. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Messalina was getting married again. To Gaius Silius, the consul designate, one of the most powerful and ambitious senators in Rome. Young, handsome, everything Claudius wasn't. But here's the detail that shatters your brain. She didn't hide it. This wasn't a secret affair conducted in shadows with plausible deniability. This was a public wedding ceremony with witnesses, with formal vows, with a legal marriage contract signed and sealed while she was still married to the Emperor of Rome. The ancient sources describe it with stunned disbelief. The frozen moment when Rome's elite watched the Empress take another husband in broad daylight, as if the fundamental rules of reality simply didn't apply to her anymore. Was it a coup attempt? Did she think she could replace Claudius through marriage to a younger, more dynamic senator? Had she reached the point where transgression itself was the goal, where the thrill came not from secrecy, but from daring Rome to stop her? When Narcissus, Claudius's most trusted freedman, brought him the news in Ostia, the emperor apparently didn't believe it at first. How could he? It was impossible, unthinkable, something that couldn't happen in the real world. But the reports kept coming, senators confirming it, witnesses stepping forward now that someone was finally asking questions. The marriage contract existed. It was legal, witnessed, undeniable. Claudius returned to Rome with the Praetorian Guard, and they found her in the gardens of Lucullus, those sprawling estates where she'd hosted so many of her infamous gatherings. She was with her mother, who was begging her daughter to do something, to run, to write a petition for mercy, anything. But Messalina seemed frozen, unable to believe that after 10 years of bending Rome to her will, Rome had finally bent back. The soldiers arrived. She recognized them. She'd probably summoned some of them to her villa for private audiences. Now they were here for her. She dropped to her knees, begged, pleaded, offered her children as hostages. The soldiers didn't respond. She reached for a dagger, her hand shaking, pressed the blade to her own throat, but couldn't push. A tribune stepped forward and drove it home for her. Valeria Messalina, Augusta, Empress of Rome, died at 25 years old in a pool of blood on grass, where she once held absolute power over senators and generals. Claudius ordered damnatio memoria, damnation of memory, her statues dragged through streets and shattered, her name chiseled from every inscription, official records rewritten as if she never existed. But 2,000 years later, we're still talking about her, because the things Rome tried hardest to erase are the things we can't stop digging up. And maybe that's the real lesson about power and corruption, and what happens when you give someone unlimited authority, but no purpose beyond looking virtuous and producing heirs. The truth doesn't stay buried. It claws its way back to the surface, demanding to be remembered.